Surprisingly, over 90% of viewers haven't subscribed yet. If you're enjoying the content, hit that subscribe button. It motivates us to keep creating and helps us never miss an upload. I used to believe our house breathed with us. The rhythm of school mornings, the click of the old thermostat, the creak on the third stair that sang when our daughter tiptoed past curfew. It felt solid, earned, safe. Then, one Thursday night, safety put on heels and walked out the door. She didn't simply say she wanted a break. She stood in our kitchen with her coat still on, chin tilted like a boxer waiting for the bell. "I'm not your property," she spat, as if I'd claimed a deed to her heartbeat. "I'm opening our marriage." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it sounded like something a seminar guru would pitch over hotel coffee. Then she leaned forward and kissed my best friend, my fishing partner, my neighbor across the street, like I'd become invisible. He shifted, smug and awkward, like a kid who'd cut the line, grabbed the prize, and couldn't believe no one had stopped him. The moment stretched. The refrigerator hummed too loudly. My daughter's framed kindergarten art stared down from the wall like a jury of sunflowers. I stepped aside so my wife could leave with him, because I couldn't think of anything that would not make me smaller if I said it. The door closed, the house exhaled, and for the first time in years, I heard only my own breathing. The next morning, I changed the locks. Not out of spite, not because I believed she'd steal, but because I needed the sound of a new key turning to remind me I could still choose something. I called an attorney at lunch and told the story once, then twice when the paralegal patched in. The hard parts became bullet points. He advised speed. I filled out forms I'd hoped never to learn. By evening I had a temporary plan, a temporary calm, and a stack of papers that smelled like a copier had tried to burn the page clean. The phone lit up all weekend with jokes from my so-called friend, jokes I didn't read, because our group chat still included his name. I muted it. I scrubbed the grill. I picked up the living room twice, even though no one was coming over. Small order inside a large chaos. On Monday, I took our daughter to school in silence, broken only by the turn signal and the soft drum of rain. She watched the wipers like they were metronomes, and finally said, "Is Mom okay?" I told her I didn't know. I told her I loved her, that the grown-ups were making decisions, that none of this was her fault. She nodded in that brave way teenagers have when they've already cried alone. I didn't hear from my wife for days. The attorney filed the first wave of paperwork. I boxed her winter sweaters and labeled the box because labeling things felt like progress. Nights stretched thin. I slept on the couch, not because the bed remembered her, but because the couch let me escape the place where promises had learned to echo. A week later, my phone contained 9 missed calls and 2 voicemails from her number. The third attempt rang while I was staring at the screen. I let it go. Then my daughter called from a friend's house, voice high and urgent. "Dad, you have to let Mom in. It's her house too. She's outside. She said she's pregnant and she's sick and..." The sentence tripped over itself. "She needs help," she finally managed. "You need to save your child." I looked at the new locks as if they might answer. I remembered a doctor's office 3 years back, and the quiet, decisive choice I'd made after a long conversation we both said we wanted. "A vasectomy is reliable," the doctor had told me. "Give it a few months and you'll have certainty." We'd agreed. We'd celebrated the freedom of never again counting days on a calendar or crossing fingers. I had the follow-up test, the all-clear documented in email. I was as certain as storefront glass on a cold morning. I drove home anyway, not to open the door, but because my daughter needed to see me be steady. Our porch light made a perfect circle on the front step. My wife stood in that circle like someone about to take a stage. She looked different, sharp around the eyes, as if she'd been arguing with her reflection. He waited in his car at the curb, headlights off, pretending to scroll his phone. The sight of him felt like a toothache you keep returning to with your tongue. "Let me in," she said, arms crossed over an oversized sweatshirt. "We need to talk." "This isn't the place for it," I said. Calm voice, foot planted. "It's my home too." Her words hopped like stones thrown across water. "I'm pregnant and I caught something because you changed the locks and I had nowhere to go." "Wait," I said. "Because I changed the locks, you..." I stopped. The logic sat there like a wobbly chair. "I'm sorry you're unwell. You should see a doctor." I did. She stared past me at the door. "They said I need stability. They said stress is dangerous. Behind her, our neighbor's porch light flicked on, then off, the neighborhood's way of blinking. My daughter arrived with her friend's mom, hands jammed into jacket pockets, hope written across a face too young for this script. "Dad, please," she whispered. "Just talk inside." I lifted my phone and opened the audio recorder, not to be sneaky, but to make sure I remembered the exchange accurately. I'd learned that memory bends when it's tired. "We can talk on the porch," I said. "I'll listen. But I'm not opening the door tonight." Her jaw worked. "You're heartless. You kissed my best friend in our kitchen." The sentence sounded simpler than the weight it carried. I kept my tone level. "You announced brashly that you were opening our marriage. You left with him." She flinched like the sentence had wind. Then she leaned into a new angle. "That was a mistake. It was a moment. You pushed me there with your rules and your schedules and your control." She swallowed. "We can fix it. We have to. There's a baby." I let the silence do the work. A dog barked 2 houses over. Somewhere a television laughed. I looked at the man in the car and thought of the text he'd sent me once, "Brothers for life," and wondered which lifetime he'd meant. "I'm not the father," I said softly. "You don't get to say that." She stepped closer. "You're my husband." "Biology says it," I said just as softly. 3 years ago, I had a procedure. You drove me home and made me soup, remember? I watched the realization arrive by stages. Skepticism, then recollection, then the quick math that tells a person they are standing on the wrong side of honesty. She glanced over her shoulder at the car. The screen lit his face a ghostly blue. "We can figure this out," she whispered, more to herself than to me. "We can tell people we were trying. No one needs to know." My daughter sucked in air. I put a hand on her shoulder and felt the tension that lives where trust goes to hide. "You need rest," I told my wife. "You need care. You also need to be truthful, at least with yourself. If you want to talk about arrangements, my attorney will coordinate. I'm filing." "You're ruining us," she said. "We ruined us together," I answered. "I'm just acknowledging it." Her eyes flashed, not with grief, but with calculation. It was the look of someone scouting exits. "You can't keep me out," she said. "It's half mine. Our daughter needs stability. The court will agree." "The court will see you left voluntarily," I said. "I changed the locks after you moved out. But I'm not here to argue law on the porch." She stared at the door again, as if a different version of the evening might open it. Then she turned and walked to the car without another word. My former friend didn't meet my gaze as she climbed in. The engine murmured. They drove away with all the drama of a grocery run. When the taillights disappeared, my daughter's shoulders slumped. "Is there really a baby?" "I don't know," I said. "That's for her to confirm with a doctor and for adults to handle carefully. She said you needed to save your child." Her voice cracked on the last word. "I didn't." "No, about the procedure, She rubbed at her eyes with the cuffs of her sleeves. "Everything's confusing." "I know." I hugged her, and this time I let myself tremble. "Your job right now is school and friends and sleeping. The rest is mine." We stepped back into the quiet. I brewed tea neither of us wanted. The house felt like a patient recovering from surgery, stitched, tender, learning to move again. I told her the practical things. There'd be a schedule soon, there would be safe drop-offs, no shouting in driveways, no blame placed at her feet. She nodded, distant but listening. Later, alone in the living room, I opened a new note on my laptop titled, "After." Under it, I started listing what going nuclear would mean without burning my daughter, without torching the parts of myself I hoped to keep. Not rage, not pettiness, precision, documentation, boundaries, consequences. I pulled up my email and found the follow-up lab result from the clinic confirming sterility, saved it to a folder the attorney could access. I scrolled our home security camera footage from the night she left, purely timestamps, no audio, so no one could claim confusion about moving out. I made a list of accounts, set new passwords, turned on two-factor authentication where I hadn't already. I looked at the family calendar and took a deep breath before blocking out court dates I didn't yet know. At midnight, my phone buzzed. A message from my best friend, once best friend, stumbled in. "Let's be adults about this," it read. "You can't stop love. Love. The word looked thin in that font. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred, then typed 3 sentences. I wouldn't mind a judge reading and hit send. I told him all further communication would go through counsel. I told him to refrain from contacting my daughter directly. I wished him health. It cost me nothing and gave me the small victory of still being the kind of man I recognized. In the days that followed, I learned that endings have odd chores. You return borrowed books you forgot you borrowed. You discover a spare drawer full of ticket stubs and a dried corsage, and laugh because memory is a collage, and some fragments still sparkle. You open the fridge and wonder which condiments you'll keep when you cook only for 2. A neighbor dropped off a casserole with a sticky note. Heard things are rough. No judgment. We're here. Kindness can feel heavier than cruelty because it asks you to stay soft. I put the casserole in the oven and let the kitchen smell like garlic and hope. My attorney called with strategic clarity and the kind of calm voice people use in airports. "We'll proceed," he said. "Don't engage. Document everything. Think ahead." I told him I was thinking further than that. About safety, about what we teach our child when words and actions don't match, about respect even when respect wasn't offered. I kept working, paid bills, folded laundry. Each ordinary task was a plank on a bridge I was laying beneath my own feet. But I also started something else, a quiet plan to protect the life I'd built, to ensure truth didn't get outshouted by theater. I set up a separate bank account for household necessities and recorded every expense. I gathered photos, texts, calendars, messages, not to parade, but to counter any story that tried to rewrite reality. On the 3rd night after the porch scene, I stood in the driveway at dusk, hands in my pockets listening to the street lamp click on. A car slowed, unfamiliar. It idled in front of the house as if sniffing the air. Then the window rolled down and a woman's voice called my name. I didn't recognize it. She looked nervous, kind, decisive, the expression of someone who's about to tell you the piece of the puzzle you didn't know was missing. "I think we should talk," she said. "It's about them." I glanced at the living room window where my daughter's shadow crossed the curtain, the future moving in small, everyday ways. I turned back to the stranger at the curb and felt the bridge I'd been building extend another cautious yard. "Okay," I said. "Tell me everything." The woman in the car introduced herself as Marissa. She wasn't a stranger by accident. She lived 3 blocks over. Her kids sometimes played basketball with mine, though I'd never spoken more than a neighborly hello to her. That night, her tone had the urgency of someone holding a secret too heavy to keep. "I shouldn't even be here," she said, glancing over her shoulder like the shadows might overhear. "But you deserve to know what's been going on. She and him? They've been meeting for months, not weeks." Everyone in the neighborhood knew something felt off. I couldn't stay quiet anymore. The words didn't slice, they confirmed what my instincts had whispered. Betrayal always starts long before the confession. Marissa went on, explaining she'd seen them together often, not just casually, but close, like people rehearsing a future no one else was invited to. It wasn't a mistake, not a sudden spark. It was planned. I thanked her, promised her I wouldn't drag her into the mess, and walked back into the house. My daughter was on the couch with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, eyes flicking between me and the doorway. I told her simply, "We'll be okay." Not because I knew all the details, but because I'd decided we would be. The days blurred into careful steps. Every move I made became part of a quiet strategy. I collected paperwork, bank records, even old emails where she'd written about how happy she was. We'd made the decision for me to get the procedure, proof, clear and steady. I didn't want revenge through shouting. I wanted precision. Revenge that left no room for her side to twist the truth. Meanwhile, she kept calling. Each voicemail shifted tone. Angry one day, sorrowful the next, pleading after that. "Think of our daughter," she would say, or "We can rebuild." But the thing about rebuilding is you need bricks, not smoke. She had burned through every solid piece between us. One evening, my daughter sat beside me at the kitchen table. "Dad," she said, hesitant, "what if Mom's telling the truth about the baby? What if you're wrong?" Her eyes were searching, almost afraid of my answer. I didn't raise my voice. I simply pulled out the file I'd prepared, the doctor's note, the clinic's confirmation, the email from 3 years ago. She read it silently, lips moving over the words. Her shoulders sagged, a mix of relief and sorrow. So she lied, to me. Tears welled, and I realized the deepest wound wasn't mine. It was hers, being used as a pawn in her mother's story. I promised her that night she would never again be caught in the crossfire. She believed me, I think, because she leaned into my shoulder and whispered, "Thank you for telling me the truth." That weekend, my wife came back again, but this time with papers in her hand. She waved them like a flag. "You can't keep me out forever. The law is clear. I'm still your wife." She wanted a confrontation, wanted the neighborhood to see a scene. Instead, I stood calm on the porch and told her I'd be filing for emergency relief to protect my daughter's peace and to clarify the living situation. I didn't raise my voice, didn't match her fury. I let her words bounce off silence until finally, she stormed away. Inside, my daughter asked, "Aren't you mad?" Of course I was. But anger is like gasoline. You can use it to burn everything down, or you can use it to fuel an engine that takes you forward. I chose the engine. And in choosing that, I found my version of going nuclear. Not with shouting, not with slamming doors, but with unshakable truth, documented facts, and the steady refusal to be manipulated. It was the kind of revenge that didn't look fiery from the outside, but inside, it stripped away every false story she tried to build. The quiet kind of nuclear leaves no rubble, only a future, wide open, waiting. The legal process turned out to be less dramatic than the emotional one. Papers shuffled between attorneys, phone calls stretched long, and hearings were scheduled with all the efficiency of a crowded waiting room. But beneath that bureaucratic pace, my plan unfolded like clockwork. Every document I had gathered, proof of the procedure, records of her leaving, the security footage, formed a wall of truth she couldn't scale. My wife tried to spin the story differently. She painted herself as neglected, claimed loneliness drove her into someone else's arms, and even suggested the child she carried could somehow still be mine. But facts don't bend just because feelings demand they should. When her attorney asked for medical clarification, my doctor's letter and the lab results were produced. The certainty was absolute. The judge didn't have to say much. The silence of evidence spoke louder than her protests. At home, my daughter watched the storm from the eye. She saw her mother try to force her way back into the narrative, calling late at night, sometimes crying, sometimes furious. But with each unanswered call, my daughter understood something important. Stability doesn't come from who shouts the loudest, but from who shows up consistently. I made sure every school pickup, every dinner, every small promise was kept. That became my real revenge. Quiet reliability in a world her mother had shaken. The man she had left me for began to unravel too. It started with whispers around the neighborhood. His own marriage, yes, he had one, collapsed when the truth spilled out. He stopped jogging in the mornings, stopped waving from across the street, and eventually his car disappeared from the driveway. Betrayal rarely builds a stable home, and his had crumbled as quickly as ours once did. Watching it from a distance, I realized I didn't need to confront him. Life had already delivered his lesson. Months passed and the divorce finalized. The court granted me primary custody, with her visits supervised until she could demonstrate stability. She raged at the outcome, but rage doesn't rewrite ink on paper. My daughter and I moved forward, slowly, carefully. We repainted the living room, rearranged the furniture, small acts of reclaiming the space as ours. The creak on the third stair still sang, but it no longer carried ghosts. One night, as we sat eating pizza on the couch, my daughter looked at me and said, "You didn't yell, you didn't fight, you just proved the truth. That was smarter." It struck me then that my nuclear revenge wasn't destruction at all, it was exposure. Lies can thrive in chaos, but not in clarity. By staying calm, by holding on to facts instead of fury, I had dismantled every false story she tried to spin. I hadn't lost myself in the process. If anything, I'd found a version of myself I respected more. I won't pretend it didn't hurt. There are mornings I wake and still feel the echo of betrayal. There are nights when the silence of the house reminds me of what used to be. But pain doesn't define the ending. It only highlights the lessons. And the lesson I took was simple. When someone shows you who they are, believe them. Protect your peace. Guard your truth. As for my wife, she drifts in and out like a storm that never quite clears. Sometimes she sends long emails, full of apologies and excuses. Sometimes she sends none at all. But either way, my course is set. The locks remain changed, not just on the door, but on the chapter of my life where I allowed myself to be blindsided. I used to think revenge meant fire, shouting, or breaking what the other person loved. But I learned that the sharpest revenge is simply living unshaken, letting the truth shine so bright that the lies collapse under their own weight. That was my version of going nuclear, not to burn everything down, but to ensure that nothing false could stand. And in the end, the house still breathes. The laughter returns in small doses. The rhythm steadies again, and the third stair still creaks. Only now it sings a different tune, one of survival, of clarity, and of the quiet strength that comes from walking through betrayal without letting it define you.